Hello and welcome. Find a comfortable spot. Let the weight of the day settle and drift away. Tonight, we're not going to unravel complex doctrines or debate ancient history. We're just going to sit together for a while and listen to a story. A very old story about what happens when life, as you know it, simply falls apart. It's a story about losing everything. We often think of faith as something that helps us gain things, peace, blessings, a sense of purpose. But what is faith worth when all you seem to do is lose? Our journey begins in a place you won't find on a modern map, the land of Uz. Try to picture it. Not a desert of endless, shifting sand dunes, but a fertile expanse, a semi-arid but prosperous region somewhere on the Arabian Peninsula. Think of rolling hills covered in scrub and hardy grasses, marked by the deep green of wadis where water collects. The air is dry, the sun is generous, and the nights are brilliant with stars, unobscured by the glow of any city. It's a land of pastoral wealth, where a man's fortune is not counted in gold coins locked in a chest, but in the life that moves across his land. The bleating of sheep, the lowing of oxen, the soft padding of 1,000 camel feet. This was the world of a man named Job. The scriptures introduce him with a simple yet profound description. He was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. This isn't just a throwaway line. It's the very foundation of the story, the fulcrum upon which everything will turn. Let's take a moment to unpack that. Blameless doesn't mean he was perfect, that he never had a selfish thought or said a sharp word. In the context of his time, it meant he was a man of immense integrity. His word was his bond. When he made a deal, you didn't need a contract scribbled on papyrus. A handshake and a look in his eye were enough. He was the kind of man you'd want as a neighbor, the kind of leader you trust to judge a dispute fairly. Upright speaks to his moral compass. He walked a straight path. He didn't cut corners in business. He didn't exploit the poor or take advantage of the vulnerable. He was known not just for what he did, but for what he didn't do. In a world where power often meant the freedom to oppress, Job used his influence to protect. He was a pillar of his community, a source of stability and justice. And the root of it all, he feared God and turned away from evil. This wasn't a cowering, terrified fear. The Hebrew word here, yer, carries a sense of profound reverence and awe. It's the feeling you get when you stand at the edge of the Grand Canyon, a breathtaking awareness of your own smallness in the face of something immense and powerful and beautiful. Job's life was oriented around this awe for the Creator. It shaped his ethics, his relationships, his very being. It was this reverence that made him actively, consciously, turn away from evil. He saw the chaos, the selfishness, the cruelty that humans are capable of, and he made a daily choice to walk in the opposite direction. So this is Job, not some abstract figure, but a man of substance and character. A man deeply respected, not just for what he had, but for who he was. And what did he have? The numbers given in the Bible are staggering, even by today's standards, but to truly understand them, we have to see them as his contemporaries would have. He owned 7,000 sheep. Don't just hear the number. Picture it. Imagine the sheer expanse of pasture needed to sustain such a flock. Think of the dozens of shepherds and their families whose livelihoods depended on this one man's enterprise. These weren't just animals, they were a source of wool for clothing and tents, meat for sustenance, and a currency of immense value. 7,000 sheep meant Job was a textile magnate, a food supplier, and a bank, all in one. He had 3,000 camels. In the ancient Near East, camels were the ultimate status symbol, the equivalent of a fleet of modern-day cargo ships and luxury vehicles combined. They were the backbone of long-distance trade. They could carry immense loads across unforgiving landscapes. A man with 3,000 camels could mount a trade caravan that would be the envy of kings. He could move goods, project influence, and connect the economy of his region with far-flung markets. This wasn't just wealth, it was power and logistical supremacy. He owned 500 yoke of oxen. A yoke is a pair, so that's 1,000 oxen. These were the tractors of the ancient world. They were the engines of agriculture. 1,000 oxen meant that Job's fields were vast, plowed deeply and efficiently. He was a farmer on an industrial scale, producing grain and food not just for his own massive household, but likely for the entire region. In times of drought or famine, a man like Job would be the one people turned to for survival. His granaries would have been a beacon of hope, and he had 500 female donkeys. Donkeys were the reliable, everyday workhorses. They were used for short-distance transport, for carrying water, for turning millstones. They were essential for the daily operations of a great household. Owning 500 of them signifies an establishment of enormous complexity and size, with countless moving parts, all functioning smoothly under his oversight. To manage all this, Job had a very great household, an army of servants. These weren't just employees. They were part of a sprawling patriarchal estate. They were born on his land. They raised their families there. They were loyal to him. And he, in turn, was responsible for their welfare. He was the CEO, the chieftain, and the patriarch of a small nation-state. He was, as the text says, the greatest of all the people of the East. Not just rich, the greatest. His reputation for wealth was matched only by his reputation for righteousness. It seemed a perfect harmony. The good man was the blessed man. His piety was visibly rewarded. It was a life that made sense. But Job's greatest treasure wasn't in his fields or his pens. It was in his home. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, 10 children. In his culture, this was the ultimate blessing, a sign of God's supreme favor. A large family meant security in old age, the continuation of a legacy, and a vibrant, joyful home. And Job's children were close. They loved each other's company. We're told they would hold feasts, rotating from one brother's house to another. Picture these gatherings, the cool of the evening setting in, the flicker of oil lamps, the smell of roasted lamb and freshly baked bread, the sound of music from a lyre or a flute, and at the center of it all, the laughter of 10 siblings. They would recline on cushions, sharing stories, teasing one another, enjoying the fruits of their father's prosperity and the strength of their own bond. It's an image of perfect domestic bliss, of a family whole and happy. Job, however, was never far from his essential nature. He was a man who lived in awe of God, and that awe made him aware of the fragility of it all. He knew that human hearts, especially young ones full of wine and celebration, could stray. So, after a cycle of feasts was complete, Job would rise early in the morning. Before the sun was fully up, while the household was still quiet, he would go to perform a sacred duty. He would sanctify his children. This was a ritual of purification, of setting them apart for God. And then he would offer burnt offerings, one for each of them. A whole offering, an animal completely consumed by fire, symbolizing a total dedication to God. His reasoning, as he thought to himself, was this: it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. What a remarkable insight into the heart of a father. He wasn't worried about their outward behavior. He was concerned about the secret, hidden thoughts of their hearts. Had they, in their merriment and comfort, become arrogant? Had they forgotten the source of their blessings? Had a fleeting, ungrateful thought crossed their minds? Job's love for his children was so deep, and his reverence for God so profound, that he stood in the gap for them, making atonement for sins they might not even know they had committed. This wasn't a neurotic obsession. It was a constant, prayerful act of spiritual guardianship. This Job did continually. It was the rhythm of his life, celebrating his blessings and consecrating them back to the God who gave them. This then is the man. This is the life. A life of immense wealth, deep respect, and beautiful family love, all built on a foundation of unshakable integrity and reverence for God. It is a perfect picture. A life so complete, so blessed, so seemingly secure, that the very thought of it all vanishing in an instant is inconceivable. It is a life built of stone, solid and enduring. And now the scene shifts, dramatically. We are lifted from the dusty, tangible world of us, up beyond the brilliant stars, beyond the vault of the sky, to a place outside of time and space. We are in the heavenly court, the throne room of the cosmos. The Bible describes these moments with a stark and powerful simplicity. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Who are these sons of God? They are celestial beings, angels, messengers, the spiritual entities who carry out the work of the divine government. Imagine a great council meeting, a gathering of cosmic governors reporting back to the sovereign. And among them, one figure stands out. The text says, "And Satan also came among them." Let's be careful here. Our modern conception of Satan is often a caricature in a red suit with a pitchfork. The Hebrew here is ha-Satan, which means the adversary or the accuser. He is not presented as an independent, rival god of evil. He is part of the heavenly court, a member of the celestial administration. His role, it seems, is that of a prosecuting attorney, a roving inspector general. His job is to travel the earth and seek out flaws, to test the loyalties of God's subjects, to challenge hypocrisy. He is cynicism personified. He looks at goodness and asks, yes, but why is he good? What's in it for him? God initiates the conversation. He singles out this adversary. From where have you come? It's not that God doesn't know. It's the question of a king to his minister, a demand for a report. The adversary's reply is chilling in its casual, bureaucratic tone. From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. He has been on a grand tour of the human project. He's seen it all, the little acts of kindness and the great acts of cruelty, the prayers whispered in secret and the curses shouted in public. He is unimpressed. His tone implies a world full of flawed, self-serving creatures. And then God, like a proud father, holds up his finest example. It's as if he's saying, you think it's all rotten. You think no one is genuine. Well, have you considered my servant Job? God himself repeats the very same description we heard at the beginning of the story, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. This is the highest possible praise. It is the creator of the universe boasting about the character of one of his creatures. God is proud of Job. He sees his integrity, his reverence, his conscious choice to live rightly, and he holds it up as a shining light in a world the adversary sees as dim and tarnished. But the adversary, the ultimate cynic, has an immediate, sneering rebuttal. Does Job fear God for no reason? This is the central question of the entire book. It's a question that cuts to the very heart of faith, goodness, and the nature of our relationship with the divine. The adversary's argument is simple and devastatingly plausible. Job isn't righteous because he loves God. Job is righteous because it pays. He's running a cost-benefit analysis. The premium he pays is piety. The dividend he receives is prosperity. It's a transaction, a very profitable one. The adversary elaborates, his voice dripping with insinuation. Have you not put a hedge around him and his house, and all that he has on every side? He paints a picture of Job living in a divine bubble, a protective force field, impenetrable and absolute. Of course he's happy. Of course he's grateful. He's never known a moment of real, unprotected vulnerability. You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. It's all a setup, the adversary implies. A divine experiment with the variables fixed for success. You've given him everything a man could want. His praise is just the purring of a contented cat. Then comes the challenge, the cruel, calculating test. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Take away the hedge. Take away the blessings. Take away the prophet, and you'll see the man for who he really is. You'll see that his faith is a mile wide and an inch deep. His righteousness is just a luxury afforded by his comfort. Let him feel real loss, real pain, and that pious mask will drop. He won't just grumble. He won't just doubt. He will curse you to your face. It's a direct, bold, and terrible wager. The adversary is betting that human nature is fundamentally self-serving, and that even the best among us will break when the price of faith becomes too high. The silence in the heavenly court must have been profound. The fate of a good man hangs in the balance, a pawn in a cosmic argument about the nature of goodness itself. And then God responds. It is, perhaps, one of the most difficult and mysterious passages in all of Scripture. God agrees to the test. He says to the adversary, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." God removes the hedge. He grants permission. He places all of Job's worldly possessions, his wealth, his livelihood, and most terrifyingly, his children, into the hands of the accuser. The only limit is that Job's own body cannot be harmed. The stage is set for a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The adversary, permission granted, leaves the presence of the Lord. Descending from the serene heights of the heavenly court back to the unsuspecting world of Uz, his mind already spinning with the logistics of destruction. And so we return to earth. We return to Job's life, which is, at this moment, proceeding as it always has. The sun rises over his fields. His servants are at their work. His children are gathered, celebrating. It is a day like any other. The cosmic decree has been made, but on the ground, all is peaceful. The calm before a storm of impossible violence. The narrative focuses on a particular day. It was the day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. The picture of joyful celebration we imagined earlier is now tinged with a terrible dramatic irony. We, the readers, know what is about to happen. They are blissfully unaware. Their laughter is the last laughter they will ever share. The wine they drink is their last. A messenger comes to Job. He is not walking. He is running, stumbling, his clothes torn, his face pale with shock and streaked with dust and sweat. He is the sole survivor of the first catastrophe. He bursts into Job's presence, gasping for breath. The words tumble out of him in a torrent of horror. The oxen were plowing, and the donkeys feeding beside them. He sets a scene of utter normality. A peaceful, productive morning. The heavy, rhythmic work of the oxen turning the soil. The more placid grazing of the donkeys nearby. It's the engine of Job's agricultural empire at work. Then, the sudden horror. And the Sabaeans fell upon them, and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The Sabaeans, raiders from the south, from the region of Sheba, not a random act of violence, but an organized, lightning-fast military raid. Imagine the chaos, the shouts of the attackers, the terrified bellows of the oxen, the desperate, futile resistance of the servants. A lifetime of work, 1,000 powerful animals, the very foundation of his farming enterprise, all gone in a matter of minutes. His loyal servants, men he had known his whole life, slaughtered where they stood. And only one man, one terrified man, escapes to bring the news. Job is still processing this, the sheer scale of the loss, the violence of it. His mind is reeling. But before he can even formulate a response, while the first messenger is still speaking, another one arrives. This one smells of smoke and ozone. His eyes are wide with a different kind of terror, a supernatural dread. He doesn't even wait for the first man to finish. He interrupts, his voice cracking. The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The fire of God. This wasn't a wildfire. This wasn't an accident. This was seen as a direct, divine act, a bolt of lightning from a clear sky, perhaps, but of such intensity that it incinerated everything. 7,000 sheep, his shepherds, an entire ecosystem of wealth and livelihood vaporized. This blow is different from the first. The first was human malice. This feels like an act of God. The very God Job fears and reveres now seems to be actively destroying him. The hedge of protection isn't just down. It feels like the hand of God itself has become a fist. The mind struggles to reconcile this. How can the source of all blessing become the source of such destruction? The theological ground beneath Job's feet begins to tremble. And again, the refrain, I alone have escaped to tell you. Each survivor is a testament to the totality of the loss. Job is staggering now, physically and mentally. The sheer velocity of the disaster is overwhelming. He has lost his agricultural base. He has lost his textile empire. But his logistical power, his camels, they are still. No, while the second messenger is still catching his breath, a third arrives. Another runner, another sole survivor, another story of total ruin. The Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made a raid on the camels, and took them, and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The Chaldeans, another known enemy, disciplined warriors from Babylonia. This wasn't a random smash and grab like the Sabaeans. This was a calculated, strategic military operation. They formed 3 companies, surrounding the camels and their handlers, cutting off any escape. A brilliant pincer movement. 3,000 camels, the pride of the East, his connection to the wider world, his fleet of desert ships, all commandeered. His most trusted caravaneers, men who knew the secret paths of the desert, all cut down. In the space of a single morning, Job has gone from being the greatest of all the people of the East to being financially ruined. His entire economic world has been dismantled, piece by piece, with ruthless efficiency. Human raiders from the south, a terrifying act of nature from the sky, organized armies from the north. He is being assaulted from all sides, as if the entire world, natural and human, has conspired against him. It is a complete and total financial wipeout. A ruin so absolute it's hard to comprehend. But through it all, as he stands there absorbing these 3 hammer blows, there is one thought that might have sustained him. My children, my legacy, my family is safe. We can rebuild. As long as I have my sons and daughters, I have not lost everything. And then the fourth messenger arrives. This one is different. He is not just a servant reporting a loss of property. He is a member of the household staff from his eldest son's home. His face is not just one of terror, but of an unspeakable, personal grief. He is the harbinger of the final, unbearable news. He doesn't need to run. His slow, shattered approach says everything. As Job looks up and sees him, a cold dread must have seized him, a premonition that the worst was yet to come. The final messenger speaks, his words heavy as stones. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. He begins with the image of their joy, which only twists the knife deeper. And behold, a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead. A great wind from the desert, a tornado or a supercell downdraft, a force of nature so powerful and so precise that it struck the four corners of the house simultaneously, causing an instantaneous, total collapse. There was no time to run, no chance of escape. One moment there was laughter and music, the next silence and dust and the crushing weight of rubble. 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, his entire legacy, the future of his line, the joy of his heart, extinguished in a single, violent moment. And for the last time, the terrible, lonely refrain. And I alone have escaped to tell you. The fourth messenger falls silent. There is nothing more to say. The destruction is complete. The adversary has done his work with breathtaking cruelty and precision. He has taken everything that Job owns, and now everything that Job loves. He has left Job with nothing but the breath in his lungs and the clothes on his back. He has left him standing alone in the ruins of a perfect life. The world stops. The air grows still. The messengers have fallen silent. The only sound is the frantic beating of Job's own heart in his ears. What happens in a moment like this? The human mind is not built to process this level of catastrophic loss in such a short span of time. There is shock, a merciful numbness that prevents the full force of the pain from landing all at once. But underneath the shock, the reality begins to seep in, cold and sharp as ice water. His sons, his strong, handsome sons who were meant to carry his name, his daughters whose beauty was renowned, whose laughter filled his home. He can see their faces, he can hear their voices, but they are gone, all of them, in one instant. The feasts are over forever. The house is empty. The future is a blank wall. This is the moment of the test. The adversary's prediction hangs in the air. He will curse you to your face. This is the breaking point. This is where a man should shatter. This is where faith should die, where rage and bitterness and despair should consume everything. What does Job do? Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head. These are not frantic, uncontrolled actions. They are rituals, deeply significant acts of mourning in the ancient world. Tearing the robe was an outward expression of an inward tearing of the heart. It was a visceral display of grief, making the invisible wound visible. Shaving the head was a sign of utter devastation, of being stripped bare. It symbolized a loss of personal glory and vitality, a return to a state of nakedness and humility. He is physically demonstrating his new reality. He has been stripped of everything, his honor, his wealth, his joy. So he strips himself. He owns his brokenness. And then he does the last thing anyone would expect. He doesn't raise his fist to the sky and scream. He doesn't rail against the injustice of it all. He fell on the ground and worshipped. He falls to the dust from which he was made, the very dust to which his children have now returned. And in that place of ultimate lowliness, he worships. It is a stunning, paradigm-shattering act. What could this worship possibly look like? It is not joyful praise. It is not happy thanksgiving. It must be a groan, a surrender, a desperate clinging to the only thing he has left, his knowledge of God, however painful and confusing that knowledge has now become. And from his lips come the most famous words of the entire story. Words forged in the hottest fire of human suffering. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Let us sit with those words for a moment. They are so familiar to us that we can miss their revolutionary power. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. This is a radical statement of truth. He acknowledges the fundamental nature of the human condition. We arrive with nothing, and we leave with nothing. Everything in between wealth, family, health, reputation is alone. It is a gift held in trust. It is not ours by right. In his moment of total loss, Job affirms this difficult truth. He is not being fatalistic. He is being realistic. He is aligning himself with reality, even when that reality is excruciating. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. This is the heart of his faith. He still affirms God's sovereignty. Even in this, he sees the hand of God. He doesn't attribute the Sabaean raid, the fire from heaven, the Chaldean attack, or the great wind to chaos or fate or bad luck. He sees it all as flowing from the same source that gave him his blessings in the first place. This is an almost impossible mental and spiritual feat. To hold in one hand the memory of God's goodness, and in the other, the present reality of God's seeming cruelty, and to say, this is the same God. He doesn't understand it. He cannot possibly reconcile it, but he will not deny it. He will not create a smaller, more manageable God who only does things that make sense to him. And then the final incredible phrase, blessed be the name of the Lord. He blesses the one who has, from his perspective, allowed this devastation. This is the opposite of a curse. The adversary predicted that Job would curse God. Instead, Job blesses him. This is not a denial of his pain. He is not pretending it doesn't hurt. He has torn his robe and shaved his head. His heart is shattered. But in the midst of that agony, he makes a conscious choice. He chooses to bless, not to curse. He chooses reverence over rebellion. He chooses to believe that God is worthy of praise, even when life is unworthy of living. The scripture gives us a concluding sentence to this first act of the drama. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. He passed the first test. The adversary's theory has been disproven. Job's faith was not a transaction. It was not a fair-weather faith. He has been stripped of everything he has and everyone he loves, and he has not broken. His integrity holds. He has held fast to his awe of God, even when that God has become a terrifying and incomprehensible mystery. The scene shifts again, back to the heavenly court. Once more, the sons of God are assembled, and once more, the adversary is among them. The cosmic council meeting reconvenes. God again initiates the conversation with the accuser. From where have you come? The same answer. From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. But this time, his tour has had a specific focus. He has been observing the fallout of his own destructive work in the land of Uz. And God speaks again, but this time his voice carries a note of vindication. Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He repeats the praise, but adds a new, crucial clause. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. God acknowledges the situation. He states that Job's destruction was without reason, meaning it was not a punishment for any sin Job had committed. It was a test, instigated by the adversary. And Job is passing. He still holds fast his integrity. The man's character is proving to be unshakable, but a cynic is never truly defeated. The adversary is not ready to concede. He simply raises the stakes. He has a new theory, an even more cynical and desperate one. Skin for skin, he says. It's an old proverb, a piece of marketplace haggling wisdom. It means you'll give up anything you own to save yourself. You'll trade your ox for your donkey, your camel for your ox. All of a man's possessions are just extensions of himself, and he will sacrifice them to protect the core. The adversary argues that the first test was insufficient. All that a man has he will give for his life. He's saying, sure, you took his property. You took his children. A terrible blow, no doubt. But it was all external to him. He's still safe inside his own body. His health is intact. He is not personally in pain. His grief is immense, but grief is an abstraction compared to the torment of one's own flesh. Then comes the second, more terrible challenge. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Let him feel pain, not just emotional pain, but chronic, debilitating, humiliating physical pain. Let his own body betray him. Let every moment be an agony. Let him be unable to find rest or comfort. Then you will see the real Job. Then the integrity will crack. Then the fear of God will turn to bitter hatred. The final layer of the hedge, the protection of his own health, must be removed. Once again, God agrees to the terms of the test. The permission is granted, but with a final, vital limit. Behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. You can afflict his body, but you cannot kill him. The adversary now has permission to inflict suffering, but not the release of death. And so the accuser departs once more, descending upon the already devastated Job with a new and more intimate form of torture. The scripture says he struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. The Hebrew word for these sores suggests a severe, inflammatory skin disease. We can only speculate about the exact medical diagnosis, perhaps a form of leprosy, though not necessarily Hansen's disease as we know it, or severe eczema or boils. But the description is clear. It was total. From the bottom of his feet to the top of his scalp, his entire body was covered. Try to imagine the sheer misery of this. The constant, maddening itch that can never be satisfied. The burning inflammation. The weeping pustules. The pain of any movement, of clothes touching skin. The inability to find a comfortable position to sit or lie down. Sleep would have been a distant memory, replaced by long nights of relentless torment. His appearance would have become grotesque, his skin disfigured and foul. The physical agony was matched by the social humiliation. In his culture, such a disease was seen as a mark of divine displeasure, a sign of some secret, terrible sin. The man who was once the most respected figure in the region, the one people came to for wisdom, was now an object of horror and disgust. He was unclean. People would have recoiled from him. Children would have run from him. He was utterly isolated. His response to this new agony is a picture of abject misery. He took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. He sits in the town's ash heap. This was the garbage dump, the place where refuse and the ashes from hearths were thrown. It was a place of filth and destitution. For the greatest man of the East to be sitting in an ash heap is the ultimate symbol of his fall. He has gone from the palace to the dump, and he is scraping his weeping sores with a potsherd, a piece of a broken clay jar. It's a desperate attempt to relieve the itch, but it's also a futile gesture of self-mutilation. It's the action of a man at the very end of his rope, reduced to the most basic, animalistic level of suffering. It is in this state, financially ruined, bereaved of all his children, socially ostracized, and in constant physical agony, that he is approached by one of the few people left to him, his wife. We do not know her name. She is simply Job, wife. And she, too, is a victim of this tragedy. She has also lost her 10 children. She has lost her home, her status, her security. She has gone from being the wife of the most respected man in the land to being the wife of a diseased outcast sitting on a pile of garbage. She has endured it all alongside him. Now, seeing him in this state of unceasing, pointless agony, something inside her finally breaks. She comes to him, and her words are like shards of glass. Are you still holding fast your integrity? Curse God and die. It's easy to read her as a villain, another tempter. But perhaps we can see her with more compassion. This might not be a cry of malice, but a cry of mercy, twisted by despair. Imagine her perspective. She looks at the man she loves, a good and righteous man, and sees him being tortured for no reason. His integrity, his righteous stand, what has it gotten him? Nothing but more pain. His faithfulness seems like a cruel joke. Her cry might be one of a broken heart. Let it go, my husband. This noble suffering is pointless. It's not working. The God you are so determined to bless is torturing you. Give up this fight. Scream your rage at him. Say the words. And maybe, just maybe, he will strike you with a final blow and put you out of this unbearable misery. Curse him and find the release of death. It is the prayer of one who can no longer bear to watch the suffering of her beloved. Job's reply is steady, even from the ash heap. He doesn't lash out at her. He corrects her, but gently. You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. He doesn't call her foolish, but says she is speaking like one who has lost her perspective in grief. And then he asks her a question that cuts to the core of his own conviction and to the core of the adversary's test. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? The word translated as evil here is ra. It doesn't necessarily mean moral evil, but calamity, disaster, hardship. It's the opposite of tav, or good. Job's question is profound. Do we have a selective faith? Do we sign up for a relationship with God that is only valid as long as things are good? Do we treat God like a vending machine where we insert piety and only expect blessings to come out? Job says no. A true relationship, a true reverence, accepts the totality of the sovereign God, both the parts we understand and enjoy, and the parts that are painful and mysterious. To accept the giving hand and reject the taking hand is to worship a God of our own creation, not the God who is. And so, for a second time, the scripture gives its verdict on Job's response. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. He has been pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance, and he has not cursed God. He has complained. He has lamented his birth. He has scraped his sores in the ashes, but he has not sinned. He has not charged God with wrongdoing. The adversary's second theory has also, for now, failed. The news of Job's unprecedented disaster travels. Word of mouth, carried by traders and travelers, spreads across the region, and it reaches the ears of 3 of his friends. These are not casual acquaintances. They are men of similar stature and wisdom: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They are chieftains or elders from nearby regions. They hear about the raids, the storm, the fire, the death of his children, and they make a pact. They will go to him together, to mourn with him and to comfort him. Their intention is noble. This is what friends do. They show up. They travel, probably for many days, to be with their friend in his time of need. They are coming to offer sympathy, to share his grief, to provide solace. They arrive, and they see him from a distance, but they don't recognize him. The man sitting on the ash heap is so ravaged by disease, so gaunt from suffering, so utterly changed from the powerful, dignified man they knew, that they literally do not know who he is. The sight of him is so shocking, so horrifying, that their first reaction is one of overwhelming grief. They raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. They immediately enter into his mourning. They perform the same rituals of grief that Job himself did. They tear their fine clothes. They throw dust, the symbol of mortality and sorrow, over their heads, letting it settle on them. They are, in this moment, joining him in his lowliness. They are saying, "Your pain is our pain. Your sorrow is our sorrow." And then they do the single most helpful, compassionate, and wise thing they will do in the entire story. They sat down with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. 7 days, a full week in complete silence. Try to comprehend the power of that silence. This wasn't an awkward, uncomfortable silence. It was a sacred, intentional silence, a silence of solidarity. They didn't come with easy answers or pious platitudes. They didn't say, "You'll get through this," or "God has a plan." They knew that words were useless in the face of such monumental suffering. Any attempt to explain it or minimize it would have been an insult to his pain. So they just sat. They were simply present. They breathed the same dusty air. They felt the same sun beat down on them by day and the same chill settle in at night. They watched him scrape his sores with the potsherd. They heard his groans, and they offered him the ministry of their silent presence. They created a space where his grief could be what it was, without judgment or analysis. In their silence, they honored the magnitude of his loss. They communicated more powerfully than any words could that they saw him, they were with him, and they had no idea what to say. And that was okay. For 7 days, Job and his friends sit in a tableau of shared, silent misery. Job, the epicenter of the pain, and his friends, a silent chorus, bearing witness. The test has run its course. The adversary has thrown everything he has at this one man. He has lost his wealth, his family, and his health. He has been stripped of everything but his life and his bewildering, stubborn faith. And as he sits there in the ashes, surrounded by the silent testament of his friends, shared grief, the first phase of his ordeal comes to a close. He has lost everything. The question that will dominate the rest of his story is what he and we can possibly find in the emptiness that remains. For 7 days and 7 nights, Job and his friends sat in a silence that was heavier than stone, a silence that honored a grief too vast for words. Job's loss was a frontal assault from the universe, a series of devastating blows from raiders, from nature, from the very hand of God. It was a loss that came from the outside in, stripping away his life layer by layer. But there is another kind of loss, one that can feel even more intimate and corrosive. It's the loss that doesn't attack from the outside, but implodes from within. It's the loss that comes when the hedge of protection is broken not by an enemy, but by a brother. It's the pain that comes not from a hostile world, but from a hostile home. To find this story, we must travel back in time to the generation before the people of Israel were a nation, when they were just one sprawling, complicated, and deeply dysfunctional family. we leave the arid plains of Uz and go to the greener hill country of Canaan, to the tents of a patriarch named Jacob. This is the man who wrestled with an angel and was given a new name, Israel. He was a man blessed by God, chosen to be the father of a great nation. But the divine promises that hung over his future did little to solve the tangled, painful realities of his present. Jacob's household was a tinderbox of jealousy, resentment, and favoritism, just waiting for a spark. And that spark was his favorite son, a boy named Joseph. To understand Joseph's story, you have to understand the story of his mother, Rachel. Jacob had two wives who were also sisters, Leah and Rachel. It was a complicated arrangement from the start, born of trickery. Jacob had worked for 7 years for the right to marry Rachel, the woman he truly, deeply loved. But on his wedding night, he was deceived into marrying her older sister, the weak-eyed Leah, instead. He was then allowed to marry Rachel a week later, in exchange for 7 more years of labor. So from day one, the household was split. There was the beloved wife, Rachel, and the unloved wife, Leah. God, the scripture tells us, saw that Leah was unloved, and he opened her womb. She began to bear sons for Jacob, one after another. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. With each son, her heart cried out with the same desperate hope. Surely now my husband will love me. But he never did. His heart belonged to Rachel. Meanwhile, Rachel, the beautiful, beloved wife, was barren. Her womb was closed. Can you imagine her pain? In a culture where a woman's worth was measured by her children, her barrenness was a source of deep shame and anguish. She watched her sister, the sister she was endlessly compared to, produce son after son for the husband who loved her, Rachel, more. The jealousy between the sisters was toxic, and it poisoned the very air their children breathed. Finally, after many long years, after Leah had borne 6 sons, and the wives, maidservants, had borne 4 more between them, the scripture says, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She gave birth to a son, and she named him Joseph, which means he will add, for she said, may the Lord add to me another son. Joseph was not just another son. He was the son of Jacob's old age, born to him by the wife he had waited and worked 14 years for, the wife he had loved his entire life. To Jacob, Joseph was a miracle, a gift, the long-awaited fulfillment of his deepest desire. And Jacob, a man who had known what it was to be the less favored son himself, made a terrible, classic mistake. He didn't hide his preference. He flaunted it. All the love, all the tenderness, all the affection that should have been distributed among 12 sons was funneled into this one boy. His 10 older brothers saw it every day. They were the sons of the unloved wife or the sons of concubines. They were reminders of duty, of complication. Joseph was the son of love. They would come in from the fields, smelling of sheep and sweat, their hands calloused from hard labor, and they would see Joseph, clean and cared for, sitting at their father's right hand, listening to his stories. They felt like farmhands in their own home, while he was treated like a prince. Their resentment was a slow-growing cancer in the heart of the family. The Bible is blunt about it. They hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. There was no easy banter, no brotherly camaraderie. Their conversations were clipped, strained, a thin veneer of civility over a boiling cauldron of jealousy. And then Jacob did something that turned this private resentment into a public humiliation. He gave Joseph a gift, a coat, but this was no ordinary coat. The Hebrew phrase, kethanath pasim, is often translated as a coat of many colors. But a more likely translation is a coat with long sleeves, or a full-length robe. In that culture, laborers wore short-sleeved, knee-length tunics that allowed for freedom of movement. A long, ornate, full-sleeved robe was the garment of royalty, of management, of someone who did not perform manual labor. Imagine the scene. Jacob calls the family together. He presents this magnificent garment, woven with rich threads, a cascade of color and artistry, and he places it on the shoulders of his second youngest son, Joseph, a teenager of 17. In that single act, he was making a public declaration. This is not a worker. This is my heir. This is the one who will rule. He effectively disinherited his 10 older sons in front of their very eyes. The coat wasn't just a gift of affection. It was a mantle of authority. It was a wearable insult. Every time Joseph put it on, he was putting on his father's favoritism for all to see. Every time his brothers saw it, they were reminded of their secondary status. The coat became a symbol of everything they hated, and their hatred for the boy wearing it grew even deeper. Into this already toxic environment, Joseph, with the blissful, naive arrogance that only a favored 17-year-old can possess, threw a match. He started having dreams, and he made the disastrous mistake of telling them to his brothers. The first dream was set in their world, the world of agriculture. "Behold," he said, his eyes bright with the wonder of his own nocturnal vision. "We were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." He might have told it with wide-eyed innocence, expecting them to share in the marvel of it. But his brothers heard only one thing: domination. They heard the confirmation of their deepest fears. Their response was dripping with sarcasm and fury. "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to have dominion over us?" The dream gave voice to the message of the coat. It wasn't just that their father favored him. It was that Joseph himself believed he was destined to rule them. The dream was proof that he shared in his father's delusion. And so, the scripture says, they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. One would think that after such a hostile reaction, a person might learn to be more discreet. But Joseph was 17, and he was convinced of his own importance. He had another dream, and this one was even grander, even more audacious. He didn't just tell his brothers this time, he told his father as well. "Behold," he announced, "I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. The symbolism was unmistakable. The sun, his father Jacob. The moon, the matriarch of the family, perhaps a reference to Lee, as Rachel was now deceased. The 11 stars, his 11 brothers. He was no longer content with ruling on earth. His dreams had now ascended to the cosmos. He saw the entire family, the very patriarch himself, bowing before him. This was too much even for Jacob. He rebuked his son. "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" It was an unthinkable breach of patriarchal authority. But then, the text adds a fascinating, crucial detail. And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in his mind. His brothers' jealousy reached a fever pitch. This was the final proof of his insufferable arrogance. But Jacob, while rebuking him publicly, privately wondered. He was a man who knew about significant dreams. His own life had been shaped by a dream of a ladder to heaven at Bethel. He recognized the potential ring of divine truth in his son's celestial vision. He stored it away, pondered it, and perhaps that quiet pondering, that look of consideration in his father's eye, was the most infuriating thing of all to the older brothers. Even when he was being reprimanded, Joseph still held their father's deep, almost mystical attention. The stage was set. The hatred had reached its peak. The only thing missing was the opportunity. That opportunity came one day when the 10 brothers took their father's flocks to graze far to the north, near a place called Shechem. They had been gone for some time, and Jacob, ever worried about his sons despite their strained relationship, decided to send Joseph to check on them. "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So Joseph set off. A boy of 17, dressed in his magnificent, hated coat, traveling alone through the countryside on a mission from his father. It was a journey of many miles, a walk that would have taken him several days. He travels from the valley of Hebron, his home, up to Shechem. But when he arrives, his brothers are not there. A man finds him wandering in the fields, a conspicuous figure in his fine robe. "What are you seeking?" the man asks. Joseph explains, and the man gives him a crucial piece of information. "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" Dothan was even further north. Joseph, dutiful and perhaps a little lonely, presses on. He is determined to find them, to fulfill his father's request. He walks toward Dothan, unaware that he is walking toward his own destruction. And then his brothers see him. They see him from a great distance. And what do they see first? Not their brother, not the son of their father. They see the coat, a flash of color on the horizon, moving steadily closer, a walking symbol of their humiliation and his arrogance. And in that moment, seeing him alone, vulnerable, and far from the protective gaze of their father, the years of festering hatred finally boiled over into a murderous conspiracy. "Here comes this dreamer," they sneered to one another. The name was a curse on their lips. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits." Then, We will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. It's a chilling plan, born of pure spite. Their goal isn't just to eliminate him, but to mock his destiny. Let's see your sheaves, and your stars bow down to you from the bottom of a pit, dreamer. Let's see if your grand future can survive a bloody death in the wilderness. It was an act of fratricide aimed squarely at the heart of his and their father's faith in his specialness. But there was one dissenting voice. Reuben, the firstborn. Reuben, who had once disgraced himself by sleeping with his father's concubine and had lost his birthright as a result. Perhaps he saw a chance to redeem himself, to win back some favor with his father. Or perhaps a genuine pang of conscience struck him. He couldn't stomach the idea of shedding his own brother's blood. He devised a compromise, a plan to save Joseph without directly confronting the murderous rage of his 10 brothers. "Let us not take his life," he urged them. "Shed no blood, cast him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." His secret intention, the text tells us, was to come back later, pull Joseph out of the pit, and restore him to their father. It was a risky, halfway measure, an attempt to placate the mob while secretly working against it. The brothers, perhaps content to let the wilderness do their dirty work for them, agreed. So when Joseph finally arrived, tired from his long journey, expecting to greet his brothers, he walked into an ambush of hatred. Before he could even speak, they swarmed him. They seized him, and the first thing they did was rip the coat from his back. That beautiful, offensive coat. They stripped it from him with a violence that was about more than just cloth. They were symbolically stripping him of his favored status, of his father's love, of his dreams. They were making him naked, bringing him down to their level. Imagine Joseph's terror, the confusion turning to sheer panic. These are his brothers, his own flesh and blood. He pleads with them. He must have screamed their names, begged for mercy, reminded them that they shared a father. But their hearts were hard. They had waited too long for this moment. They ignored his cries. They dragged him to a nearby cistern, a deep, bell-shaped pit dug into the limestone to collect rainwater. But this one was dry. And they threw him in. The world went dark for Joseph. He landed with a thud on the hard-packed earth at the bottom. Above him, a circle of blinding light, framed by the hate-filled faces of his brothers. Then those faces disappeared. He was alone in the cold, silent dark. He had lost his freedom, his dignity, his connection to his father. He was buried alive, left to die of thirst and starvation. His desperate cries would only echo off the stone walls around him. And what did his brothers do, having just committed this monstrous act? The scripture gives us one of the most chillingly callous details in the entire Bible. Then they sat down to eat. They opened their packs of bread and cheese and sat down to have lunch. A few yards away, their 17-year-old brother was screaming for his life from the bottom of a hole in the ground, and they calmly ate a meal. The sound of their casual conversation would have drifted down to him, a torment worse than the silence. It was a demonstration of an indifference so profound it borders on the demonic. He was no longer a person to them. He was a problem that had been solved. But as they were eating, they looked up and saw something that would change the course of history. A caravan of Ishmaelites, traders, was coming from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, on their way down to the great market of Egypt. And now another brother speaks up. Judah, the fourth son of Leah, whose name would one day be given to the entire Jewish people. Judah looks at the pit, and then he looks at the caravan, and a new idea forms in his mind. It's a pragmatic, calculating thought. What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? He asks them. He's not appealing to their conscience. He's appealing to their greed and their sense of logic. Killing him and hiding the body is messy. It leaves a blood guilt on their hands, and it's a waste. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. It's a twisted piece of reasoning. He acknowledges their kinship, he is our brother, as a reason not to kill him, but not as a reason to save him. Selling him into slavery becomes the merciful option. It absolves them of the direct act of murder, and it even turns a small profit. It is a compromise born of a sliver of guilt and a large dose of cold-hearted practicality. The brothers, seeing the logic in it, agree. So they hauled Joseph out of the pit. Can you imagine the flicker of hope in his heart as he was pulled back into the light? Was Reuben saving him? Had they changed their minds? But that hope died as he saw their faces. They weren't repentant. They were businessmen. They dragged him over to the caravan leader and began to haggle. They sold him for 20 shekels of silver, the price stipulated in the law of Moses for a male slave between the ages of 5 and 20. They sold their own brother for the standard price of a commodity. They took the coins, perhaps testing their weight in their hands, the blood money that sealed their crime. Joseph was handed over to the traders. He was bound. He looked back one last time and saw the faces of his brothers, the men who should have been his protectors, watching as he was led away. The caravan began to move, the camels plodding steadily south toward Egypt. With every step, Joseph was carried further from his home, from his father, from everything he had ever known and loved. He had lost it all. His family had not been taken from him by a tragic act of God. They had actively, willingly, sold him away for the price of a few silver coins. This was a loss so total, so personal, so steeped in betrayal, that it could have, and perhaps should have destroyed his soul forever. The caravan journey to Egypt would have been a brutal ordeal. Joseph was no longer a person, he was cargo, chained, likely, to other unfortunate souls, forced to walk under the hot sun, given minimal food and water. He was leaving the familiar hills of Canaan and entering the flat, alien landscape of the Sinai Peninsula. Every night he would try to sleep on the hard ground, the silver coins his brothers received clinking metaphorically in his memory. He was surrounded by a foreign language, foreign faces, a future that was a terrifying blank. He arrived in Egypt, the superpower of the ancient world, a land of bewildering majesty and strangeness. The massive temples, the towering pyramids, the teeming, chaotic cities along the Nile. He was taken to a slave market, a place of profound human degradation. He would have been poked, prodded, inspected like an animal. And there he was purchased by a man named Potiphar. Potiphar was not just any Egyptian. He was an official of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. This was the chief of the royal military police, a man of immense power and influence. Joseph was taken from the slave block to the household of one of the most powerful men in the most powerful nation on earth. He had gone from favored son to victim in a pit, to a slave in a foreign land. His life had been utterly upended, and yet something remarkable happened. In this place of humiliation and loss, Joseph began to thrive. The text gives a simple, powerful explanation. The Lord was with Joseph. This wasn't a magic spell that made everything easy. It was an inner strength, a core of integrity and competence that his circumstances could not crush. The betrayal did not make him bitter. The loss did not make him cynical. He channeled his energy into his work. He was diligent, intelligent, and honest. He learned the Egyptian language, their customs, their methods of administration. He simply did every task, no matter how menial, with excellence. Potiphar noticed. He saw that this young Hebrew slave was different. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper. The household accounts were in order. The other servants worked more efficiently under his supervision. There was an aura of blessing and competence around him. Potiphar was so impressed that he began to promote Joseph. He moved him from manual labor to administration. Soon, Joseph was the superintendent of Potiphar's entire household. He made him overseer over his house and put him in charge of all that he had. This is a staggering rise. A foreign slave, a teenager, was now the chief operating officer of the estate of a high-ranking Egyptian official. Potiphar trusted him so completely that the text says, he did not concern himself with anything but the food he ate. Joseph managed his finances, his staff, his fields, his entire portfolio. He had, against all odds, carved out a new life for himself. He had found a measure of success and stability. He had lost his family, but he had gained a position of honor and trust. It was a fragile recovery, a new life built on the ashes of the old. But the adversary, the spirit of cynicism that tested Job, is not a one-trick pony. When external hardship fails to break a person, a new trial often emerges, this time from the complexities of human desire. Joseph had grown into a man. The Bible describes him as handsome in form and appearance. And someone else noticed, Potiphar's wife. Here again, we meet a woman known only by her husband's name. We can imagine her life. The wife of a powerful man, living in luxury, but perhaps lonely. Her husband is a busy state official. She has servants to meet her every need, but no one to meet the needs of her heart. And she sees this young, beautiful, capable slave who runs her household with such grace and authority. He is forbidden fruit, an object of fascination. She began to proposition him. The text says she cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." It wasn't a subtle hint. It was a direct command, a demand from a woman who was used to getting what she wanted. Joseph refused, and his refusal is one of the great statements of integrity in all of literature. He doesn't just reject her for fear of being caught. He gives two profound reasons. First, his loyalty to his master. "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife." He is saying, "Your husband has shown me complete, unconditional trust. He has honored me. How could I possibly repay that trust with such a profound act of betrayal?" He recognized the sacredness of the trust Potiphar had placed in him. But his second reason goes even deeper. It's not about Potiphar, it's about God. "How then can I do this great wickedness," he asks, "and sin against God? Even here in Egypt, a land of 1,000 gods, a slave in a foreign house, Joseph's moral compass is still oriented toward the God of his father. His identity is not defined by his circumstances, slave, overseer, but by his relationship with the unseen God. Adultery to him is not just a betrayal of a human master. It is a sin against the very fabric of divine order. It is a fundamental violation of his own being. Potiphar's wife was not deterred. The scripture says she spoke to Joseph day after day, but he would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. He actively avoided her. He rearranged his schedule. He made sure he was never alone with her. He did everything he could to prevent a situation from arising. But one day, his luck ran out. He went into the house to do his work, and none of the other household servants were inside. It was a perfect opportunity. She saw her chance. She caught him by his garment, his tunic, and made her demand one last time with desperate insistence. "Lie with me." This time, there was no room for words. Joseph did the only thing he could do. He fled. He wrenched himself free from her grasp, but in his haste, he left his garment in her hand. He ran out of the house, half-dressed, choosing public humiliation over private sin. Potiphar's wife was left standing there, alone, holding his tunic. Her desire turned instantly to rage. She had been rejected, scorned, by a slave. Her pride was wounded, and she was in a dangerous position. He could report her. She had to act first. She had to spin the story. She began to scream. She called to the other servants, her voice full of fake terror and righteous indignation. "See," she cried, playing the race card, "he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us." She paints Joseph as a dangerous foreigner, an outsider who has violated their home. "He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house." It was a brilliant, wicked lie. And the garment in her hand was the physical proof. It was the coat all over again. But this time, instead of being a symbol of favor, It was a symbol of his alleged crime. When her husband, Potiphar, came home, she repeated the story to him, her voice trembling with feigned violation. "The Hebrew servant, whom you have brought among us, came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house." Potiphar's anger was kindled. He had to be angry. His wife claimed to have been assaulted. His honor as a husband and as a master had been publicly challenged. The evidence, the garment, seemed undeniable. He had to act. Any sign of weakness would destroy his reputation. And so, for the second time in his life, Joseph was thrown into a pit. He took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. This was, in many ways, a loss even more devastating than the first. When his brothers sold him, he was just a boy. Now he was a man who had, through sheer force of character, rebuilt his life. He had climbed from the depths of slavery to a position of power and respect. He had done everything right. He had been faithful to his master and faithful to his God. And his reward was to lose it all again, to be stripped of his position, his reputation, his freedom, and to be thrown into a dungeon, branded as a rapist. Think about the injustice of it. He was in prison not because he had done wrong, but precisely because he had refused to do wrong. His righteousness had led directly to his ruin. This is a profound test of faith. It's one thing to believe God is with you when you are prospering. It's quite another to believe it when your integrity leads you straight to a jail cell. But even here, in the darkness of the royal prison, the story repeats its familiar, stubborn refrain. But the Lord was with Joseph. The place had changed, but the man had not. His character was not dependent on his environment. In the filth and despair of the prison, Joseph's integrity and competence once again shone through. He didn't sulk. He didn't rage against the injustice. He just started being Joseph. He was helpful. He was organized. He was trustworthy. And the chief jailer, like Potiphar before him, noticed. This Hebrew prisoner was different. He was a natural leader. The jailer began to give him responsibilities. Soon, he had put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners. The chief jailer paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. It's an incredible pattern. From favored son to pit, to slave to overseer. Then from overseer to pit number 2, the prison, to, effectively, the prison overseer. Wherever he is planted, no matter how toxic the soil, he creates order and excellence. He has lost his freedom, but he has not lost his character. He is confined by stone walls, but his spirit is not confined. He was in this state, a prisoner running the prison, when 2 new inmates arrived. These were not common criminals. They were high-ranking officials from Pharaoh's own court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. They had offended the king in some way and had been thrown into the same prison where Joseph was. And because Joseph was in charge, it was his duty to attend to them. One morning, Joseph came to them, and saw that they were dejected, their faces full of anxiety. And here we see another glimpse into Joseph's remarkable character. He is a prisoner himself, a victim of gross injustice. He has every reason to be consumed with his own misery. But he looks at these two men and feels empathy. He asks them a simple, kind question. Why are your faces downcast today? They tell him their problem. They have each had a dream during the night, a vivid, disturbing dream, and there is no one in this forsaken place to interpret it. They believe, as all Egyptians did, that dreams were messages from the gods, and the anxiety of not knowing the message was eating away at them. Joseph's response is immediate, and it shows where his confidence lies. He doesn't say, "I am an interpreter of dreams." He says, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." He positions himself not as the source of the wisdom, but as the channel. It is an act of deep humility and unshakable faith. The chief cupbearer goes first. He describes his dream, a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. He took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph gives the interpretation immediately. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, he says. It is a dream of restoration. The cupbearer will be forgiven and will get his old job back. Having delivered this wonderful news, Joseph, for the first time, allows a sliver of his own desperation to show. He makes a heartfelt, human plea. "Only remember me when it is well with you," he begs the cupbearer. "And please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon." He doesn't blame Potiphar's wife or rail against his fate. He just states the simple, true facts of his innocence. He was kidnapped, and he is innocent. It is a plea for justice from a man who has known none. The chief baker, hearing the positive interpretation of the first dream, is encouraged and eagerly tells his own. He dreamed he had 3 baskets of white bread on his head, and in the top basket were all sorts of baked goods for Pharaoh. But birds came and ate them out of the basket on his head. Joseph's face must have fallen. He had to deliver a message that was just as certain, but terrible. The 3 baskets are also 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. It was a dream of execution. 3 days later, it happened exactly as Joseph had predicted. It was Pharaoh's birthday, and he held a feast for all his servants. He reviewed the cases of his 2 imprisoned officials. He lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. The cupbearer was restored to his position. The baker was hanged. Joseph's credentials as a divinely inspired interpreter were now proven beyond any doubt. The cupbearer was free. He was back in the palace, standing at Pharaoh's right hand, his life and career restored. And Joseph, back in the darkness of the prison, waited. He must have waited with a desperate, burning hope. cupbearer would remember. He would tell Pharaoh about the innocent Hebrew in the dungeon who could read the secrets of the night. His ordeal would finally be over, but the final, quietest, and perhaps cruelest blow of all was about to fall. The story concludes the chapter with a heartbreaking sentence. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. He just forgot. He was caught up in his own good fortune, his return to the world of power and luxury, and the plight of the man who had predicted it all simply slipped his mind. The one thread of hope that Joseph had been clinging to was cut. The door that had been cracked open was slammed shut and locked. And so Joseph waited for 2 more full years. He languished in that prison, forgotten by the one man who could have saved him. This was a new kind of loss, not the violent loss of betrayal or the dramatic loss of a false accusation, but the silent, grinding loss of hope. Every morning he would wake up, and the cupbearer would not have sent for him. Every night he would go to sleep, his plea unanswered. This was the loss of being forgotten. It was the ultimate test of his patience, of his ability to trust in God's presence, when there was absolutely no earthly evidence that anything would ever change. He was at the bottom of his second pit, and this time there was not even a passing caravan to offer a twisted form of escape. There was only silence and waiting. For 2 long years, Joseph waited in the silence of a forgotten prison cell. His hope, once tethered to the promise of a grateful cupbearer, was left to wither. Yet in that silence, his faith endured. It was a quiet, stubborn faith, a belief in the presence of God, even in the absence of all evidence. It's a powerful picture of resilience, the story of a man who lost everything, but never lost his essential character or his trust in a divine purpose, however hidden. But the Bible, in its unflinching honesty, shows us that this is not the only way to respond to catastrophic loss. Faith isn't always quiet and steadfast. Sometimes, when life strips you bare, faith becomes a scream of protest. Sometimes, the heart doesn't find solace in surrender, but instead finds its voice in a profound and searing bitterness. This is not the story of a prophet or a prince. It's the story of an ordinary woman, a wife and mother, who found herself on the far side of grief with a heart full of stones. Her name was Naomi, and her story teaches us that sometimes the most honest prayer is a complaint, and the most authentic relationship with God is a wrestling match. Our story begins not in a prison or a palace, but in a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Judah. The town's name was Bethlehem, a name that means the house of bread. It was a name that spoke of its identity, of its purpose. It was a place of fertile fields, of golden harvests of barley and wheat. It was a community built on the promise of sustenance, a place where the simple, sacred act of making bread was the rhythm of life. To be from Bethlehem was to be from a place of nourishment, a place blessed with the staff of life. But in the days when the judges ruled Israel, a time of chaos and moral confusion, a terrible irony fell upon the house of bread. The rains stopped coming. The sky became brass, and the earth became iron. The green stalks of wheat withered and turned to dust. The barley fields produced nothing but cracked, barren soil. A famine settled over the land. The house of bread had no bread. The promise of the place was broken. The laughter in the streets was replaced by the low murmur of anxiety, the hollow look of hunger. Living in Bethlehem at this time was a man named Elimelech. His name, too, was a statement of faith. Elimelech, my God is king. He had a wife, Naomi, whose name meant pleasant or sweetness, and they had 2 young sons, Mahlon and Chilion. Their names, perhaps given in a time of sickness or premonition, were less auspicious. Mahlon can be translated as sickly, and Chilion as failing or frailty. They were a family of the covenant, living in the land God had promised to their ancestors. But the promise was ringing hollow. Their king seemed distant, and the land he had given them was starving them. Every day, the situation grew more desperate. Elimelech would look at the faces of his wife and his 2 small boys, and he would have to make an impossible choice. The choice every parent fears: stay in the place you call home, the place of your people and your God, and risk starvation. Or abandon everything you know, venture into a foreign, hostile land in the desperate hope of finding food. He made his decision. They would leave. They would become economic refugees. And their chosen destination was a place fraught with historical and spiritual baggage: the land of Moab. Moab was not just any neighboring country. It was across the Dead Sea, on the other side of the Jordan Valley. The Moabites were relatives of the Israelites, descendants of Abraham's nephew, Lot. But they were also long-time rivals and enemies. Their god was Chemosh, a deity to whom, it was sometimes said, children were sacrificed. The Moabites had refused to give the Israelites food and water when they first came out of Egypt. They had hired the prophet Balaam to curse them. To an Israelite, Moab was a place of paganism and hostility. To choose to go to Moab was not just an act of emigration, it was an act of desperation. It was a step away from the community of faith, away from the land of the covenant, into a place that was spiritually and culturally alien. Imagine the day they left, packing their few remaining belongings onto a donkey, saying goodbye to their friends and neighbors, the ones who were choosing to stay and tough it out. The looks they would have received, some of pity, some of judgment. Are you really leaving the land of Yahweh for the land of Chemosh, just for a bit of bread? Every step they took away from Bethlehem was a step into uncertainty. They were leaving their home, their heritage, their identity as citizens of the house of bread, to become landless aliens, immigrants in a country that did not worship their God. Naomi, whose name meant pleasantness, was walking toward a life that would be anything but. They arrived in Moab and began the difficult process of building a new life. They were outsiders. Their accents were different. Their customs were strange. They were the Hebrews who had fled the famine, looked upon with suspicion, or at best, a kind of detached pity. But they survived. Elimelech found a way to provide. they found a place to live. The boys, Mahlon and Chilion, grew up as third culture kids, caught between the Hebrew stories of their parents and the Moabite culture of their friends. For a time, it seems that Elimelech's desperate gamble had paid off. They had escaped the famine. They were alive. And then the first great blow fell. The scripture delivers it with stark, brutal simplicity. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died. There are no details. No long illness, no tragic accident described. Just the blunt fact of his absence. The man whose name meant, "My God is King," died, not in the promised land under his king's care, but as an exile in Moab. Imagine Naomi's grief. Her partner, her protector, the man who had made the decision to bring them here, was gone. She was now a widow in a foreign land. This was a position of profound vulnerability in the ancient world. She had no land, no inheritance, and now no husband to provide for her. All she had left were her 2 sons. The weight of the family's survival now fell upon their young shoulders. The pleasantness of Naomi's life was beginning to curdle. The years passed. The story fast forwards an entire decade. In that time, Mahlon and Chilion come of age. They make a life for themselves in Moab, and they do something that further cements their family's place in this foreign land. They take Moabite wives. Mahlon marries a woman named Orpah, and Chilion marries a woman named Ruth. This was a significant and likely controversial step. The laws of Israel often warned against marrying foreign women, fearing they would lead the men to worship other gods. For Naomi's sons to marry Moabite women was a sign of how deeply they had assimilated. Perhaps it was a practical necessity. There were no Hebrew women to marry. Perhaps it was love. For Naomi, it must have been a bittersweet development. Her sons were building families, but they were doing it with women from outside the covenant. Yet, in Orpah and Ruth, she gained daughters. We can infer from the story that a deep bond of affection grew between these 3 women. The 2 young Moabite women came to love their Israelite mother-in-law, and she loved them in return. For a time, a new family unit was formed. A small, blended, international family of a widowed mother and her 2 sons with their foreign wives, making a life for themselves on the high plateau of Moab. It might have felt like a recovery, a new beginning, a fragile hope that a future was still possible here. But the names of Naomi's sons, sickly and frailty, proved to be a terrible prophecy. The second wave of tragedy struck, a wave so devastating it would wash away everything Naomi had left. The text is again breathtakingly concise. And both Mahlon and Chilion died also. One can only imagine the horror. Did they die at the same time, in an accident, of the same sudden plague? Or did one sicken and die, only to be followed, a short time later, by his brother? The Bible spares us the details, forcing us to focus on Naomi's perspective. She had already buried her husband. Now she had to bury her sons, her only children, her last connection to her past, and her only hope for the future. The loss was absolute. Look at her situation now. She is an aging woman, a widow, childless because her sons died before they could produce any heirs. She is an alien living in a foreign country. She has no land, no provider, no protector. Her family line, the line of Elimelech, has been extinguished. The entire family unit that walked out of Bethlehem all those years ago to escape death by famine has been completely annihilated by death in Moab. All that remains are 3 women, 3 widows, Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. The text summarizes her state with devastating precision. So the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. The word is shar, left behind, bereaved. She is what is left over after death has taken everything else. In the depths of this grief, a piece of news reaches her from her old home. A traveler, perhaps, or a merchant. The news is that the famine is over. The Lord had visited his people and given them food. The rains had returned. The harvests were plentiful again. Bethlehem was once again the house of bread. For Naomi, this news is not a simple joy. It is a bitter irony. God is blessing his people in Judah, while her family, who left to survive, has been wiped out. The news galvanizes her. There's nothing left for her in Moab. It is a land of graves. Her only option is to go home. So she makes the decision to return to Bethlehem. Not as a successful sojourner returning with wealth and a large family, but as a defeated, broken woman returning with nothing but the clothes on her back. Her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth, loyal and loving, begin the journey with her. They leave their homes in Moab and set out on the road that leads back toward Judah. Imagine the 3 of them, a small, sad procession of black-clad widows, walking the dusty road together. They reach a crossroads. Perhaps it is the edge of Moab, the border where the path descends toward the Dead Sea before climbing again into the hills of Judah. And here, Naomi stops. She turns to her 2 young companions, and she makes a speech that is both an act of incredible love and a testament of utter despair. She tells them to go back. Go, return each of you to her mother's house, she says. This is significant. She doesn't send them back to their father's house, but to their mother. It's a recognition of their shared female experience, a sending of them from one woman's care to another's. And she gives them a blessing, a prayer that is steeped in her own pain. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. She acknowledges their faithfulness. She sees their goodness. You are good wives to my sons. You have been good daughters to me. May God give you the kindness that he has so obviously withheld from me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. She is wishing for them the one thing she knows she can never provide: security. A new husband, a new home, a new life. Go back, find a Moabite husband, have children, be safe. There's no future for you with me. Then she kisses them. It is a kiss of farewell. And the 3 of them break down, weeping together on the side of the road, a shared grief for the men they have all lost, and for the future they will not have together. But Orpah and Ruth protest. Their love for Naomi is genuine. No, they cry, we will return with you to your people. They are willing to follow her into her poverty, to a foreign land where they they will be the outsiders. Naomi's response is to lay bare the full extent of her hopelessness. She counters their emotional loyalty with a blast of bitter, irrefutable logic. "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me?" she pleads. And then she explains why their case is so utterly without hope. She brings up the Israelite custom of levirate marriage, where if a man died childless, his brother was to marry the widow to provide an heir for the dead man. But her sons are dead. She has no more sons to give them. Her argument becomes a cascade of despairing, rhetorical questions. "Have I more sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband." She is pushing them away, trying to make them see the futility of staying with her. And then her logic takes an even more desperate turn. "Even if I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this very night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying?" The idea is absurd. It's impossible. She is painting the bleakest possible picture of their future with her to convince them to save themselves. And then she reveals the true source of her anguish. It is not fate. It is not bad luck. In her mind, it is God himself who is her enemy. She says, "No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." This is a stunning statement. She sees her own suffering reflected in the blighted future of her daughters-in-law. Her pain is magnified because her tragedy has spilled over onto them. And she names the perpetrator, the Lord. Yad, YHWH, the hand of the Lord. This is the same phrase used to describe the plagues on Egypt, the powerful, active hand of God intervening in history. But Naomi feels that hand not as a delivering hand, but as a fist pressed down upon her, crushing her. She has come to believe that God is personally, actively hostile to her. Her words, full of such bleak finality, have their effect. The three women weep together again. Then Orpah, practical and heartbroken, makes the logical choice. She kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. She has obeyed. She has chosen life, security, the path of reason. The Bible says she returned to her people and to her gods. It was not a malicious act. It was a sensible one. She chose the familiar over the unknown, the promise of a future over the certainty of a barren one with Naomi. But Ruth refused. The text says simply, Ruth clung to her. The Hebrew word davak is powerful. It's the same word used in Genesis to describe a man leaving his parents and clinging to his wife to become one flesh. It's a word of unbreakable, covenantal loyalty. It is an act of defiant love in the face of logic and despair. Naomi, seeing her still there, tries one last time to push her away. "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." She presents Orpah's rational choice as the model to be followed. Ruth's reply is perhaps the most beautiful and radical declaration of loyalty in all of Scripture. She answers her mother-in-law's bitter logic with a flood of poetic, heartfelt commitment. It is a vow that systematically dismantles every barrier between them. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, she begins. And then she makes her case. For where you go, I will go. She chooses Naomi's unknown destination over her own known home. And where you lodge, I will lodge. She chooses Naomi's homelessness and poverty over her own family's security. Your people shall be my people. This is a radical shift in identity. She is renouncing her Moabite heritage and adopting the identity of an Israelite, a people who had long been her own people's enemies. And your God, my God. This is the most stunning statement of all. She is abandoning Chemosh and the gods of her ancestors, and choosing to cast her lot with Yahweh, the very God whom Naomi has just accused of being her personal tormentor. Ruth is choosing to follow Naomi into a relationship with a God who, from all available evidence, is hostile and cruel. It is a faith born not of blessing, but of love for the person who is cursing that God's name. She seals her vow with an oath that embraces the finality of death. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. She is severing her ties to her ancestral land completely. She will not even return to be buried with her own kin. Her destiny is now completely intertwined with Naomi to the very end, and she concludes with a self-curse, calling on this new God to be her judge. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything, but death parts me from you. The vow is absolute. It is a total conversion of kinship, nationality, religion, and destiny. It is an act of pure, unadulterated heased covenantal love, steadfast loyalty. Faced with this torrent of devotion, Naomi finally falls silent. The text says, "And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said nothing more to her." There was nothing left to say. Ruth had made her choice, so the two of them walked on alone. The aging, bitter Israelite and the young, determined Moabite. They journeyed together, two small specks of loss and loyalty, making their way back to the house of bread. Their arrival in Bethlehem causes a stir. The whole town is abuzz. After 10 years, one of their own has returned. The women of the village gather, looking at this weary, grief-stricken figure. "Is this Naomi?" they ask. There is wonder in their voices, and perhaps a bit of shock. They remember the woman who left, perhaps younger, fuller, happier. They see the woman who has returned, stooped and weathered by grief. The name Naomi, meaning pleasant, no longer seems to fit the person they see before them. Naomi hears them, and she answers their question with a public proclamation of her brokenness. She rejects the name they have called her. "Do not call me Naomi," she commands them. "Call me Mara." She renames herself. She casts off the identity of pleasant and takes on a new one, Mara, which means bitter. It is a bold, defiant act. She is refusing to pretend. She is insisting that the world acknowledge the reality of her experience. I am not the woman I was. My life is not pleasant. My soul is full of bitterness, and I will be called by the name of my new reality. And then, in front of the entire community, she lays the blame squarely where she believes it belongs. She makes her theological case against God. For the Almighty, has dealt very bitterly with me. She uses the name Shaddai, the Almighty, a name often associated with blessings and fertility, and she turns it on its head. The All-Powerful has used his power to crush me. She presents her evidence, a stark before and after picture of her life. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. When she left, she was full. She had a husband and 2 sons, the core of a family, the promise of a future. She returns empty, Rehoboam. It means empty-handed with nothing. In her bitterness, she cannot even see the loyal woman standing beside her. To her, Ruth, a Moabite, a foreigner, doesn't count. She doesn't replace the husband and sons who were her claim to a future in Israel. She is a symbol of her emptiness, not a solace for it. She concludes her indictment with a final, devastating summary. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? She sees her entire life story as a court case, with God as both the prosecutor and the judge. Her suffering is not random. It is a verdict. Her emptiness is God's own testimony against her. God himself has declared her guilty, and her punishment is this calamity. This is where the story of Naomi's loss ends, and the story of her restoration through Ruth begins. But for now, let us leave her here. Let us sit with her in her bitterness. She is standing in the streets of her hometown, a place that should feel like a comfort, but now only serves to highlight her losses. She has lost her husband, her sons, her future, her home in Moab, and her pleasant disposition. Most of all, she feels she has lost the favor of her God, who has become, in her eyes, her divine oppressor. She is Mara, the bitter one, brought low and left empty by the hand of the Almighty. Her story is a raw, honest, and uncomfortable portrait of a faith that doesn't quietly endure, but that cries out in pain and dares to demand an answer from a silent heaven. And standing silently beside her, a testament to a love that persists even in the face of such bitterness, is the slight, steady figure of Ruth, the Moabitess. A single, flickering candle of hope in Naomi's profound and desolate darkness. We left Naomi in the streets of Bethlehem, renaming herself Mara, bitter. Her voice a public cry of protest against a God she felt had personally testified against her. Her loss was total, and her response was a raw, unfiltered accusation. It's a deeply human reaction, one that gives voice to the part of us that wants to scream unfair when the universe turns against us. But the scriptures offer us many portraits of loss, many different paths through the valley of the shadow. What happens when the loss you suffer feels less like a cosmic injustice and more like a bill coming due? What happens when you look at your own ruin and see not the random cruelty of fate, but the terrible, logical consequence of your own past sins? For this story, we turn to a king. Not just any king, but the greatest king Israel ever knew, David. We will not find him as the young shepherd boy, full of faith, facing down Goliath. We find him much later in his life. He is an old lion, a brilliant warrior, a gifted poet, a man after God's own heart, but also a man deeply scarred and compromised by his own moral failures. His is a story of losing everything: his throne, his capital, his honor, not to a foreign army, but to a rebellion that springs from his own family, led by the son he loved most in the world. It is the story of a king on the run, a father fleeing his child, and a sinner finally paying the price for a crime he thought he had buried long ago. To understand David's flight from his son Absalom, we have to go back to a hot afternoon in Jerusalem many years earlier. It was the moment David's life pivoted from a story of righteous ascent to one of tragic consequence. From the rooftop of his palace, he saw a beautiful woman bathing. Her name was Bathsheba. He wanted her, and as king, he took her. It was a gross abuse of power. When she became pregnant, he arranged for her husband, Uriah the Hittite, one of his most loyal and honorable soldiers, to be killed in battle to cover up the crime. David committed adultery and murder, and he thought he had gotten away with it. But God sent the prophet Nathan to confront him. Nathan told a parable about a rich man who stole a poor man's one beloved lamb. And when David, in his righteous anger, condemned the rich man, Nathan pointed his finger and spoke the 4 words that shattered David's world. "You are the man." David repented profoundly and sincerely. God forgave his sin in the sense that David himself would not die for it. But Nathan delivered a prophecy, a consequence that would shadow the rest of David's life. "The sword," Nathan declared, "shall never depart from your house. Your sin was done in secret, but its consequences will be public and brutal, and they will play out within your own family." The curse began to unfold almost immediately. The first sign was the death of the child conceived with Bathsheba. But this was just the beginning. The violence David had unleashed on Uriah's family now took root in his own. He had many wives and many children, and his palace became a hotbed of the same kind of jealousy and rivalry that had plagued his ancestor Jacob's family. The first eruption of the curse came through his firstborn son, Amnon. Amnon developed an evil obsession with his beautiful half-sister, Tamar, who was the full sister of David's 3rd son, Absalom. Feigning illness, Amnon lured Tamar to his chambers and brutally raped her. It was a vile act, a repetition of David's own sin of using power to take what he wanted. And what was David's response? The Bible says he was very angry, but he did nothing. He failed to bring justice for his daughter. He failed to punish his firstborn son. He was a father paralyzed, perhaps, by the echoes of his own guilt. But Tamar had a brother who would not let it go. Absalom. If you could cast Absalom in a movie, you would choose the most impossibly handsome actor you could find. The Bible tells us that in all Israel, there was no one so much to be praised for his beauty as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no blemish on him. He was also incredibly charismatic, and he had a mane of thick, luxurious hair that he would cut only once a year, and it weighed a king's ransom. He was the golden prince, the people's darling, and he loved his sister Tamar. When he saw her devastated and shamed, he took her into his own house, and he began to hate his brother Amnon. But his was not a hot, impulsive hatred, It was a cold, patient, calculating hatred. For 2 full years, he said nothing to Amnon, good or bad. He waited, he watched, he planned. Then he made his move. He organized a great sheep-shearing festival, a time of feasting and celebration, and invited all the king's sons, including Amnon. He persuaded his father David to let Amnon attend. At the height of the feast, when Amnon's heart was merry with wine, Absalom gave a signal to his servants. They fell upon Amnon and killed him. It was a cold-blooded public execution. Having served his own form of brutal justice, Absalom fled, going into exile for 3 years in the kingdom of Jeshurun, his mother's homeland. David was heartbroken, mourning for Amnon, the son he had lost, and longing for Absalom, the son who was now a fugitive murderer. Eventually, David's shrewd and ruthless general Joab orchestrated a way to bring Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the reconciliation was incomplete. For 2 more years, Absalom lived in his own house in the capital, but was forbidden from seeing his father's face. He was a prince in exile in his own city, a public humiliation that would have curdled his resentment into pure ambition. Finally, after forcing Joab's hand by burning his barley field, Absalom was granted an audience with the king. David, the aging father, kissed his beautiful, estranged son. But the kiss was an empty gesture. The damage was done. The relationship was broken beyond repair. Absalom had tasted power, and he now believed it was his for the taking. He began what can only be described as a brilliant, patient, 4-year-long political campaign to steal the kingdom from his father. It was a masterclass in populist insurgency. First, he created the image of power. He got himself a chariot and horses, and 50 men to run before him. This was a royal procession. He was visually presenting himself as a king in waiting, a man of stature and importance. Second, he positioned himself strategically. Every morning, he would go and stand by the way of the city gate. In the ancient world, the gate was the courthouse, the city hall, the public square. It was where business was done and legal disputes were settled. Anyone with a grievance who wanted to appeal to the king for judgment had to pass through the gate. And there, every morning, was the handsome Prince Absalom, waiting for them. Third, he perfected his message. As a man from some distant tribe would approach, Absalom would intercept him. He would ask where he was from and listen intently to his case. And then he would deliver his devastatingly effective lines. "See," he would say, with a look of deep sympathy, "your claims are good and right." He starts by validating them completely. "You are right. Your cause is just." And then the subtle poison. "But there is no one deputed by the king to hear you." He was painting a picture of his father's administration as neglectful, incompetent, and deaf to the needs of the common person. He wasn't attacking David directly. He was attacking his government. Then, with a sigh of false humility, he would deliver the hook. "Oh, that I were judge in the land. Then every man with a suit or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." He was offering himself as the people's champion, the man who would finally listen the one who would right all wrongs. Fourth, he sealed it with a personal touch that was revolutionary. When the man, overwhelmed by the attention from a prince, would bow down to him, Absalom would reach out, take his hand, lift him up, and kiss him. He inverted the protocol of power. Instead of receiving homage, he offered intimacy. He made every person he met feel seen, heard, and personally valued by royalty. The Bible says, "So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel." He did it one handshake, one kiss, one sympathetic conversation at a time, for 4 long years. He built a nationwide network of personal loyalty that completely bypassed the official structures of his father's kingdom. When he judged the time was right, he put the final phase of his coup into motion. He went to David and asked for permission to go to Hebron, David's original capital city, on the pretext of fulfilling a religious vow. David, unsuspecting, gave his blessing, "Go in peace." But as Absalom left for Hebron, he sent secret messengers throughout all the tribes of Israel with a clandestine message. "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" To make matters worse, he invited 200 prominent men from Jerusalem to go with him, men who went in their innocence, and they knew nothing. They thought they were attending a sacrificial feast. Instead, they became unwitting political shields for his coronation. And he played his trump card. He sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's most trusted and brilliant counselor. And Ahithophel, for reasons of his own deep-seated grudge, betrayed David and joined the conspiracy. The defection of Ahithophel was a devastating blow. It was like a president learning his chief of staff has defected to the opposition. The Bible says, "The conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing." The news reached David in Jerusalem like a thunderclap. A messenger arrived, breathless and terrified. He delivered the message that would shatter the king's world. "The hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom." This was it. The sword had come home to his own house. The rebellion was not a distant threat. It was a popular uprising led by his own son. In this moment, David the king, the warrior, the strategist, had to make a choice. And his choice is remarkable. He doesn't rally his troops. He doesn't fortify the city. He doesn't prepare for a siege. His immediate command to his loyal officials is, "Arise and let us flee." His reasoning reveals the heart of a father, even in the face of such betrayal. "Or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us quickly and bring down ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword." He chose to run, not primarily out of fear for his own life, but to spare Jerusalem. He could not bear the thought of a civil war turning the streets of his beloved capital city into a slaughterhouse. He could not bear the thought of fighting his own son. And so, the great king, the man who had conquered the city and made it his own, chose to abandon it. He chose to lose everything in a single afternoon to save his people from the consequences of his family's implosion. The flight from Jerusalem is one of the most poignant and heartbreaking sequences in the entire Old Testament. It is the story of a king becoming a refugee in his own kingdom. David rises from his throne, and a sad, hurried procession forms. He leaves his palace, his home, the symbol of his entire reign. In a fateful and tragic decision, he leaves 10 of his concubines behind to keep the house, to maintain a semblance of royal presence. He walks out of the city, and his loyal followers go with him. His entire household, his officials, and his elite personal bodyguard, the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And a new group, a band of 600 foreign mercenaries from Gath, led by a man named Ittai the Gittite. They had only recently joined David, and now their new king was a fugitive. David stops the procession at the last house before the wilderness and takes stock. He sees Ittai, the foreigner, and his men, and he urges him to turn back. "Why do you also go with us?" David asks. "Go back and stay with the king." He calls his own son, the usurper, the king, for you are a foreigner and an exile from your home. You came only yesterday, and shall I today make you wander about with us, since I go I know not where? It's an act of kindness and realism. Don't tie your fate to me. I am a sinking ship. Go back, serve the new regime. But Ittai's reply is a stunning oath of loyalty, a beacon of light in the darkness of so much betrayal. "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives," he declares, "wherever my lord the king shall be, whether for death or for life, there also will your servant be." At a time when David's own son and his most trusted counselor have betrayed him, this foreign mercenary pledges his undying allegiance. David, moved, tells him to pass on, and the procession continues. Then another group appears. The priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and all the Levites with them, are carrying the most sacred object in all of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant. They are bringing God's presence out of the city to accompany their rightful king into exile. But David stops them. What he says next is a profound expression of his spiritual state. It is not the bitterness of Naomi. It is a posture of tragic, humble submission to the judgment of God. "Carry the ark of God back into the city," he commands. "If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and its dwelling place. But if he says, 'I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am,' let him do to me what seems good to him." This is the heart of David's response to his loss. He acknowledges that his fate is entirely in God's hands. He sees this calamity as a divine decision. He will not force the issue. He will not drag the symbol of God's presence into his personal struggle. He is accepting the possibility that God is done with him. He is surrendering to the divine verdict, whatever it may be. It is a moment of profound, painful piety. But even in his grief and surrender, David's mind is still sharp. He is a master of strategy. He tells the priests to return to the city in peace and to use their sons, Ahimaaz and Jonathan, as messengers. "I will wait at the fords of the wilderness," he says, "until word comes from you to inform me." He is abandoning his city, but he is establishing a spy network on his way out the door. The procession moves on, and now comes the most iconic image of David's fall. They begin to climb the Mount of Olives, the hill that overlooks Jerusalem from the east. And David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, with his head covered and walking barefoot. Picture the scene. The mighty King David, the giant slayer, the conqueror, is reduced to the state of a common, broken-hearted penitent. His head is covered, a sign of deep shame and grief. His feet are bare, a sign of mourning and humility, and he is weeping. This is not a silent, stoic grief. He is openly sobbing as he walks away from his life's work, and all the people with him cover their heads and weep as well. The entire company is a funeral procession, mourning the death of a kingdom. As he climbs, he can look back over his shoulder and see the city he has lost, the palace where his son is now installing himself on the throne. At the height of his grief, another piece of devastating news arrives. A messenger runs up and tells him Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. David knew Ahithophel's mind. The Bible says his counsel was so good it was as if one consulted the word of God. To have that brilliant, strategic mind turned against him was a terrifying prospect. In this moment of desperation, David breathes a short, sharp, whispered prayer, the cry of a man at the end of his rope. O Lord, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. And no sooner has he uttered the prayer than God seems to provide the means of its answer. As he reaches the summit of the mount, where people used to worship God, a figure appears. It is Hushai the Archite, one of David's friends and counselors. His tunic is torn, and he has dust on his head, ready to join his king in mourning and exile. But David sees an opportunity. In a flash of strategic genius, he realizes that Hushai is more valuable to him inside the city than outside it. He convinces Hushai to go back into Jerusalem. Return to the city, he says, and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king, as I have been your father's servant in time past, so now I will be your servant. He instructs him to feign allegiance to the new regime. His mission, to get inside Absalom's inner circle and defeat for me the counsel of Ahithophel. He tells him about the priests and their sons, completing the spy ring. Hushai agrees. He becomes a double agent, a man willing to risk his life by entering the lion's den for his friend and king. David prays for God to defeat Ahithophel, and then he sends a man to do the work. It is a perfect fusion of faith and action. David and his weary band continue on, descending the other side of the Mount of Olives into the wilderness of Judah. He has lost his throne, his city, his son, and his most trusted advisor. But the humiliation is not over. The path of his loss is paved with a series of painful and humbling encounters. Just past the summit, he is met by a man named Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was the crippled son of David's beloved friend Jonathan, and the last surviving heir of King Saul. David had shown him great kindness, restoring Saul's lands to him and giving him a permanent place at the royal table. Ziba arrives with a welcome gift of provisions, donkeys, bread, summer fruit, and wine for the exhausted fugitives. David, grateful, asks where Mephibosheth is. Ziba, seeing an opportunity for personal gain, tells a malicious lie. Behold, he says, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, "Today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father." He paints Mephibosheth as a traitor, an opportunist who sees David's fall as his chance to reclaim Saul's throne. David, in his state of emotional exhaustion, grief, and paranoia, believes him instantly. He doesn't question it. He doesn't ask for proof. His discernment has been clouded by his pain. He makes a rash, on-the-spot judgment. "Behold," he says to Ziba, "all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." The king on the run, who has just lost his own kingdom, gives away the property of his friend's son based on a single, unverified accusation. It is a moment of weakness, a sign of how deeply the betrayal of Absalom has wounded him. The procession shuffles on, reaching a village called Bahurim. And here, David faces his most direct and visceral humiliation. A man comes out from the village, a man named Shimei, who was from the same clan as King Saul. He sees David, the man he blames for the fall of his family's dynasty, now brought low and vulnerable. And he unleashes a torrent of pent-up hatred. He follows the procession along a ridge, and as they walk below, he throws stones at the king and his officials. He kicks up dust, a sign of utter contempt, and he screams curses at the top of his lungs. Get out, you man of blood, you worthless man," he yells. "The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood." Shimei's theology is simple. This is divine retribution. You are getting what you deserve for what you did to Saul's family. David's men are incensed. Abishai, one of his tough-as-nails generals and his own nephew, turns to David, his eyes blazing. "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king?" he snarls. "Please, let me go over and take off his head." It would have been easy. One quick command, and Shimei's cursing would be silenced forever. But David's response is, once again, astonishing. He rebukes his general. "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah?" he says, using a familiar term of frustration for his hot-headed nephews. And then he returns to his posture of penitent submission. If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, "Curse David," who then shall say, "Why have you done so?" David entertains the terrifying possibility that this man's curses are divinely inspired, that Shimei, in his hatred, is actually a mouthpiece for God's judgment. And then he delivers the most heartbreaking line of all, a line that reveals the true depth of his pain. He turns to Abishai and all his servants and says, "Behold, my own son, who came from my own body, seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to." He is saying, if my own beloved son is trying to kill me, what right do I have to be offended by the curses of an old enemy? His son's betrayal is so painful that Shimei's stones and dust hardly register, and he clings to a sliver of hope, a hope born of desperation and humility. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing this day. He will endure the humiliation. He will accept the shame. And perhaps, just perhaps, God will see his humble acceptance of his punishment and show him mercy. So the great king and his mighty men walk on, down the dusty road, being pelted with rocks and insults, and they do nothing. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, Absalom makes his triumphal entry. The city is his. The people cheer for their handsome new king. And Hushai, David's friend, successfully plays his part, convincing a skeptical Absalom of his newfound allegiance. Absalom, now on the throne, turns to his counselors. "Give your counsel," he says. "What shall we do?" Ahithophel, the brilliant traitor, speaks first. And his first piece of advice is not military, but political, and it is brutally effective. "Go in to your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house," he says. The logic is chilling. "And all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened." It was a power move of breathtaking cruelty. To publicly sleep with the king's harem was the ultimate act of usurpation. It was a symbolic gesture that said, everything that was his is now mine, his throne, his palace, and his women. It was also an act designed to make the break with his father irreparable. After this, there could be no reconciliation, no negotiated settlement. It forced all of Absalom's followers to be fully committed, because now there was no turning back. And so Absalom agrees. A tent is pitched on the flat roof of the royal palace, the very same roof where David, years before, had first looked down and seen Bathsheba, setting in motion the sin that led to this very day. And there, in the sight of all Israel, in the full light of the sun, Absalom goes in and violates the 10 women his father had left behind. The prophecy of Nathan was fulfilled to the letter. God had told David through the prophet, "I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun." David's secret sin with one woman was now being punished by his son's public sin with 10. When the news of this final, intimate, and grotesque humiliation reached David in the wilderness, it would have been the confirmation of his total loss. He had lost his kingdom. He had lost his city. He had lost his honor. And now, his own son had defiled his bed and completed his shame before the entire nation. He was a king with no crown, a father with no family, and a man with no home, left with nothing but the dust of the wilderness on his bare feet and the weight of God's terrible, righteous judgment on his soul. We left King David on a dusty road in the wilderness, a fugitive from his own kingdom, being pelted with stones and curses. He had lost his throne, his city, his honor, and the love of his favorite son. And in the face of this catastrophic loss, he chose a path of weary, penitent submission, seeing in his own ruin the long-delayed judgment of God for his past sins. His was a fall from the heights of earthly power, a slow and tragic unraveling over many years. But there is another kind of fall, another kind of loss that can happen just as completely. It is not a fall from a throne, but but a fall from a place of spiritual privilege. It doesn't take years to unfold. It can happen in the space of a few frantic hours, between the setting of the sun and the crowing of a rooster. It is the loss that comes not from ambition or malice, but from the simple, stark, and very human reality of fear. This is the story of a man who was given a new name that meant rock, who was designated as the foundation stone of a world-changing movement, and who, in the moment of ultimate testing, crumbled into dust. It is the story of Simon Peter and his devastating loss of courage, integrity, and of himself on the night his master was betrayed. To understand the depth of Peter's fall, we have to appreciate the heights from which he fell. Before he was Peter, he was Simon, a fisherman from Capernaum on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. He was a working man with calloused hands and a face weathered by the sun and the wind. He wasn't a scholar or a theologian. He was a man of action, of impulse, of immense and often reckless passion. When we meet him in the Gospels, he is all heart. He is the first to speak, the first to act, the first to leap out of the boat. His love for Jesus is fierce, absolute, and worn on his sleeve for all to see. This same impetuous nature also made him prone to spectacular mistakes. He was a man of soaring faith and sinking feet. He is the one who, seeing Jesus walking on the water in the midst of a storm, boldly cries out, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And for a few glorious moments, he does it. He walks on water. But then he sees the wind and the waves. He takes his eyes off his master, and he begins to sink, crying out, "Lord, save me." He is a perfect mixture of audacity and doubt. He was part of the inner circle, one of the privileged three, along with the brothers James and John. These three were invited into the most intimate and mystifying moments of Jesus' ministry. They were the only ones brought into the room to witness Jesus raise the daughter of Jairus from the dead. They were the only ones taken up the mountain to witness the transfiguration, to see Jesus' face shine like the sun and his clothes become a dazzling white as he spoke with Moses and Elijah. Peter, in his typical fashion, didn't know what to say, so he just said something. "Lord, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents. He was overwhelmed, but he was there. He had seen things the others had not. His defining moment, the peak of his spiritual life, came at a place called Caesarea Philippi. Jesus gathered his disciples and asked them a question that was rippling through the country. "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" They gave the popular answers: John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Then Jesus made it personal. He looked them in the eye and asked the question upon which all of history would pivot. "But who do you say that I am?" The disciples fell silent, a heavy quiet of confusion or hesitation. But Simon, as always, spoke up. And what came out of his mouth was not his own opinion, not a fisherman's guess, but a lightning bolt of divine revelation. "You are the Christ," he declared, "the Son of the living God." In that moment, he saw, he understood. Jesus' response to him was a cascade of blessing and destiny. "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Jesus confirms that this was a divine insight. And then he bestows upon Simon a new name and a new identity. "And I tell you, you are Peter, Petros," a name meaning a stone or a rock. "And on this rock, Petra, a massive foundation cliff, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." It is impossible to overstate the significance of this moment. Simon, the impulsive fisherman, is renamed Peter, the rock. He is publicly designated as the foundation stone of the community Jesus is building. He is given the very keys of the kingdom. He is the leader, the spokesman, the one on whom so much will depend. He is on top of the world, validated, blessed, and given a purpose that transcends anything he could have ever imagined. Yet, in a perfect illustration of his character, just moments after this sublime confession, after Jesus begins to explain that he must go to Jerusalem to suffer and die, Peter takes him aside and rebukes him. "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." He goes from being the channel of divine revelation to contradicting the divine plan in the space of a minute. And Jesus' response is as shocking as his blessing was. "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me." This is Peter, a man capable of touching the sublime and the ridiculous in the same breath. A man whose greatest strength, his passionate heart, is also the source of his greatest weakness. He is the rock, but his foundation has a fault line, and it is his own self-confidence. This fault line would be tested to the breaking point on the last night of Jesus' life. The scene is the upper room in Jerusalem. The mood is intimate and heavy with foreboding. Jesus has washed the disciples' feet, a stunning act of humility. He has instituted the meal of bread and wine that will become his memorial. He has spoken of his impending betrayal by one of their own number. The air is thick with sorrow and confusion. And in the midst of this, Jesus turns his attention directly to his chief disciple. He singles him out with a solemn, repeated address. "Simon, Simon," it's a call to attention, a sign that what he is about to say is of the utmost importance. "Behold, Satan has demanded to have you all, that he might sift you like wheat." What a terrifying image. Sifting. A farmer sifts wheat by throwing it into the air. The heavy grain falls back down, but the light, useless chaff is blown away by the wind. It's a violent, shaking, separating process. Satan, the adversary, the accuser, wants to put the disciples through a brutal test, to shake them so violently that their faith proves to be nothing but worthless chaff. And Peter is the primary target. Jesus follows this warning with a word of assurance. "But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers." Notice the details. Jesus doesn't pray that Peter will be spared the test. He prays that his faith, at its core, will not be utterly extinguished by it. And he speaks of Peter's recovery as a certainty. When you have turned again. Jesus knows Peter will fall, but he also knows he will get back up. But Peter doesn't hear any of that. he only hears the challenge. He hears an implication that his loyalty is in question, and his pride bristles. He cannot conceive of his own failure. His response is a passionate, heartfelt, and completely sincere boast. "Lord," he declares, "I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death." He believes it with every fiber of his being. He can feel the strength of his own loyalty, the fierce love in his own heart. He knows what he is capable of. Jesus looks at him with love, perhaps, but also with a sad clarity. "I tell you, Peter," he says, "the rooster will not crow this day until you deny 3 times that you know me." The prediction is so specific, so bizarre, that it doesn't seem to register with Peter. A little later, after Jesus warns that they will all fall away, Peter doubles down. He feels the need to distinguish himself from the others. "Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away." His statement is full of pride. They might be weak, but I am strong. And when Jesus repeats his prediction, Peter makes his final, ultimate vow. His voice is likely thick with emotion, his hand on his heart. "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all the other disciples, taking their cue from their leader, chime in with the same promise. The stage is set. Peter's vow of absolute, death-defying loyalty hangs in the air, in direct contradiction to Jesus' prophecy of a 3-fold denial. The test is about to begin. From the upper room, they go out into the night, across the Kidron Valley, to a garden on the Mount of Olives called Gethsemane. And here, we see the first cracks appear in Peter's resolve. Jesus is entering his final agony, his soul very sorrowful, even to death. He takes his inner circle, Peter, James, and John, a little further into the garden. He needs their support. He gives them a simple command: "Remain here and watch with me." He goes a little further to pray, a prayer of such anguish that his sweat falls like drops of blood. He returns to his 3 friends, the ones who had seen his glory on the Mount of Transfiguration, and he finds them sleeping. He directs his question to Peter, the one who had so recently boasted of his willingness to die. "So, could you not watch with me 1 hour?" There is a deep sadness in the question. You said you would die with me, but you can't even stay awake with me. He tells them, "Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." This is Peter's problem in a nutshell. His spirit, his intention, his love, it's all willing. But his flesh, his human frailty, his physical and spiritual stamina is weak. He does not understand the weakness of his own flesh. 3 times Jesus goes to pray, and 3 times he returns to find them asleep. The man who would be a rock is failing the first, simple test of vigilance. Then suddenly, the garden is filled with the light of torches and the clash of weapons. Judas arrives, leading a detachment of temple guards and officials to betray Jesus with a kiss. Peter, startled from his sleep, finally lurches into the kind of action he understands. His master is in danger. His loyalty kicks in. He will fight. He does what he had boasted he would do. He draws a sword. He swings wildly in the chaos and slices off the right ear of the high priest's servant, a man named Malchus. It is an act of courage, born of a fierce and protective love. But it is a misplaced courage. It is Peter trying to save the situation on his own terms, with human violence. Jesus immediately rebukes him. He heals the servant's ear and commands Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath." He is showing Peter that his kingdom will not be advanced by the sword. His plan does not involve a violent rescue. Peter's brand of loyalty, brave as it is fundamentally at odds with the path of suffering and submission that Jesus must now walk. This act of violence is Peter's last, desperate attempt to be the hero of the story. From this point on, his courage will fail him completely. Jesus is arrested. The disciples, seeing their leader bound and their hopes of a rebellion shattered, do exactly what Jesus predicted. They all desert him and flee into the darkness. But one of them turns back. Peter. He doesn't abandon Jesus completely. The text says he followed him at a distance. Imagine Peter in that moment. His mind is a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The man he believed was the Messiah is now a prisoner. The other disciples are scattered. He is alone, but he has to know what happens next. So he follows, lurking in the shadows, his heart pounding, his earlier bravado now replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He follows the procession to the palace of the high priest, Caiaphas, where the religious leaders of Israel are gathering for a nighttime trial. He slips into the courtyard of the palace. It's a large, open-air space, likely bustling with activity, even in the dead of night. A fire has been lit in the center to ward off the chill of the Jerusalem night. The courtyard is filled with temple guards, servants, and officials, all milling about, discussing the night's dramatic events. Peter, trying to make himself inconspicuous, goes and sits among them, warming his hands by the fire, pretending to be just another curious bystander. He is trying to be invisible, to gather information without being noticed. He is physically present, but he is hiding his identity. This is the first step of his denial. Then the spotlight finds him. A servant girl who keeps the gate sees him in the flickering firelight. She peers at his face and recognizes him. She points a finger and says, her voice cutting through the murmuring crowd, "You also were with Jesus the Galilean." Suddenly, all eyes are on him. The anonymity he sought is gone. He is identified. He is linked to the prisoner who is being tried for blasphemy inside. Panic seizes him. His grand promises, his vow to die for Jesus, evaporate in a heartbeat. All that is left is the animal instinct for self-preservation. In front of everyone, he issues his first denial. The Gospels give slightly different wordings, but the substance is the same. Luke's version is stark and direct. "Woman," he says, his voice flat and detached, "I do not know him." Just like that, the rock denies his cornerstone. He severs the connection. He chooses his own safety over his allegiance. The first loss is his public identity. He is no longer Peter, the disciple of Jesus. He is just a stranger by the fire. He gets up, unnerved, and moves away from the fire, toward the gateway, perhaps hopping to slip away. But another servant girl sees him. and she says to the group of people standing there, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." The accusation is repeated. The circle of suspicion is tightening. This time, Peter's denial is more forceful. The fear is making him more emphatic. He needs to be more convincing. Matthew's gospel tells us that he denied it with an oath. He says, "I do not know the man," an oath. He calls upon God to witness a lie. The man who received the keys to the kingdom is now using God's name to disown the king. This is the second loss, the loss of his integrity. He has not only lied, but he has sworn that his lie is the truth. He is digging himself deeper into the pit of his own fear. An hour passes, an entire hour. Can you imagine the agony of that hour for Peter? He is trapped in the courtyard. He can't leave without drawing more attention to himself. He is a nervous wreck, his heart hammering against his ribs, replaying the denials in his mind, terrified that someone else will recognize him. Every footstep behind him, every glance in his direction, must feel like a new accusation. And then his worst fears are realized. A group of bystanders closes in on him. Their accusation is no longer just an observation. It's an argument based on evidence. "Certainly you too are one of them," they insist, "for your accent betrays you." A Galilean accent was rough and guttural compared to the more refined Judean speech. His very voice gives him away. He cannot hide who he is. Then another man, a relative of Malchus, the servant whose ear Peter had cut off in the garden, steps forward. He looks Peter squarely in the eye and delivers the final, inescapable piece of evidence. "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" The trap is sprung. He is caught. He has been identified by his face, by his association, by his accent, and now by an eyewitness to his act of violence in the garden. There is no plausible way to deny it. All that is left to him is his grand vow. "Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you." This is the moment to make good on that promise. This is the moment to stand up and be the rock. But the rock has turned to sand. Faced with irrefutable proof, Peter does not confess. He disintegrates. The fear overwhelms him completely, and he unleashes the last, most desperate defense of a cornered man. The text says, "He began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear." He starts calling down curses, likely on himself, if he is not telling the truth. And he shouts his denial, his voice raw with panic. "I do not know this man of whom you speak." He curses, he swears, he denies. It is a total and complete disavowal. He doesn't just say he doesn't know Jesus. He acts as if the very name is foreign to him. He has lost his courage. He has lost his integrity. He has lost his sacred vow. He has lost his very identity as a disciple. In this moment, he is no longer Peter. He is just Simon, a terrified fisherman from Galilee, a world away from the man he thought he was. And in that very instant, as the ugly, cursed words are still hanging in the cold night air, a sound cuts through the chaos of the courtyard. The sound that Jesus had predicted. A rooster crows. It is a simple, rustic sound, but for Peter, it is like the trumpet blast of judgment. It is the audible signal of his own catastrophic failure. The prophecy has been fulfilled. As the sound of the rooster fades, the Gospel of Luke gives us one of the most powerful and heartbreaking details in all of literature. At that moment, Jesus is being led across the courtyard, perhaps from his interrogation by Caiaphas to another holding area. And as he passes, the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Imagine that look. Across the crowded courtyard, through the flickering firelight, the eyes of the Master meet the eyes of the disciple who has just disowned him. What was in that look? It surely wasn't a look of anger or of smug, "I told you so." It was not the look of a disappointed judge. Perhaps it was a look of infinite sorrow, a grief that was not for his own betrayal, but for the agony his friend was now feeling. Perhaps it was a look of boundless compassion, a look that said, "I know," without a single word. It was a look that did not condemn, but that pierced Peter to the very soul, because it held up a mirror to the man he was, and the man he had promised to be. That look, combined with the sound of the rooster's crow, did what no accusation could do. It shattered Peter's defenses completely. The wall of fear and denial came crashing down, and the memory of Jesus's words rushed back into his mind. "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. He finally understood. He understood the prophecy. He understood the weakness of his own flesh. And for the first time, he saw himself clearly. He saw the chasm between his proud boasts and his pathetic failure. The shame, the grief, the self-loathing. It was all too much to bear. And he went out and wept bitterly. He stumbles out of the courtyard, out into the darkness of the Jerusalem night, and he finds a place to be alone. And he weeps. This is not the quiet tearing of a few tears. The Greek word implies a loud, convulsive sobbing. The bitter, soul-wrenching cry of a man whose world has completely fallen apart. He is weeping for his master, whom he has abandoned. But mostly, he is weeping for himself. He is weeping for the loss of his own honor, the loss of his self-respect. He had built his identity on being the bold one, the loyal one, the rock. And in the space of a few hours, he had discovered that it was all an illusion. He was a coward, a liar, a man who swore and cursed to save his own skin. He had lost not his possessions, not his family, not his health. He had lost himself. He went out into the night, no longer Peter the Rock, but just Simon the Denier, a man completely and utterly broken by the weight of his own failure. And in that bitter, lonely darkness, all seemed lost.